We are very lucky to have Eamon Frasher join us from Riot Games because he's had a pretty brutal last week. The League of Legends College Championship was just last weekend. Let's get a look at some of the amazing stuff that they created out there.
Western is definitely a dark horse that no one has really recognized.
Go, lads.
I definitely see them winning the series against UCI.
Western Ontario heads to the finals to take on Maryville University.
Western plays with a lot of kind of raw power.
No one really expected them to be as good, and they are a really good team. We became friends with Western Ontario because we were sitting at the same table and we were just talking to them, and they seemed like really cool guys.
It's a brotherhood, you know, we all have mad love and respect for each other.
A lot of that friendship and trust has been through working together over a few years. We love the game and we love each other, and it's been incredible for our education as well.
It's good to meet them here, and they're even cooler in person, and there's really great guys.
Gorica, again going forward, and would you believe it? It's a 3-for-0.
I knew Niles from like a mutual friend.
Gorica hit me up for top lane tips.
I asked if he could coach me. He's just kind of like, you know, my master. Here we are in the Collegiate finals.
Massive outplay!
We want to be the team that people look to, and if you get offered to Maryville, you're like, oh my gosh, like I want to go there and I want to win titles. Winning this year would definitely put us up there as one of those schools. So it's extremely important for me to solidify Maryville as a top esports team.
Honestly, never thought I'd be here. We are a completely student-run organization. We have no official backing from our school. To be able to be called the heart and soul of the team and to have the trust of players who are honestly better than me is incredibly humbling, and I'm very, very thankful. And it would mean the world to win it.
It's Championship Sunday. There's so much on the line for all of the college competitors.
Let's go fighting!
Fighting, touches, let's go, baby.
Here we go.
Go, boys.
Hook's going to land in Niles low, but Sasuke able to get down. Slasher, CKT diving in with the World Ender on. Resurrects over the Torres. Whooping with a massive poke. Takes down Short Hop in one fell swoop. And that's going to be game one. Maryville clean up the base.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are fine, but I just want to hear. I want the fucking hype from yesterday. We're going to get some sick kills this game. We're going to be fucking hype.
It's going to be Clyde perhaps dead here. Flash over, finds the wall for the hook, but he doesn't quite go far enough. And it's going to go down. That's first blood over to Short Hop. Starting it off right here for Western. Dorica again. They're going to tag him. They'll bag him. And that's going to be a kill over. Bot lane also fighting because, of course, why not? And it's absolute carnage. Wolfie slays Julius, finding the skill shots again.
Tony, get her. I got her. Julius.
80 dead? Yep. Front line.
Yeah, just take Clyde.
Yep. Clyde, net dash maybe?
Nice.
Zoe?
Come on.
Run Zoe?
Yeah, no flash.
Nice. Let's go, boys.
Now forced to flash away. Slasher diving it over with a good rock, but Wolfie blocks the shots, takes down the Talia.
J4 now.
Yep. She's 1 HP. She's 1 HP. She's dead.
Got her. We're coming in.
I got a hook. I'll rise.
Yeah, rise.
In the
game. Okay. Flash in. Let's go.
Kill him.
Hey.
Yep, that's it. Let's go,
baby.
Came in as the #1 seed, but they wanted to reclaim the title, and today they will. Your 2019 college champion.
So if anybody was able to check it out, it was a hell of a weekend. I think, as you said, you would have liked a little bit longer of a final, but the competition leading up was pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we came into the college championship with the top 8 college teams from around North America, culminating in an absolutely incredible semifinal day where we had 2 best-of-5 series. One went to 4 games, one went to 5. So really close series. Was a long production day, and then unfortunately a 3-0 sweep in the finals. But interesting stories about the teams that made it to the finals. Were actually scrimming all day on opposite sides of the bracket to get there. So the finals meeting, you heard it in the opening tease. These guys really enjoyed each other's company over the course of the week. Came down to Maryville, taking away the championship.
Yeah, becoming quite the powerhouse. Yeah. So we're going to get a lot more dig deep into what happened last weekend. But let's do a little background first. First on yourself. I mean, how did you get into producing esports? How did you catch on with Riot? What brought you into this world?
Yeah, so absolutely. After graduating university, I started working on a couple live productions, award shows, worked on The Voice as a production assistant. That was sort of my break into the industry. But I was always a big fan of League of Legends and esports in general growing up. went to a live Worlds event at the Culver City Studios for League of Legends World Championship. Was super excited by that, applied to the company, eventually started working for League of Legends esports as a live broadcast editor, building packages much like we just saw. Ended up moving up through the ranks as a tape producer, a writer and associate producer, and now I'm one of the live broadcast producers for the LCS Academy, as well as College Championship. So a lot of my esports experience, or all of my esports experience, is at Riot Games, working on League of Legends.
Okay, so let's talk about the College Championship, the Academy, what the structure is, how Riot has kind of created a community within the college space for League of Legends, and what's the structure of the championship as well as competitions throughout the year organized by Riot?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I would say that Riot, rather than creating the college community, really cultivated it. Like, I started playing League in college. I think a lot of new League players start out in college as a way to meet friends and build that community while in kind of like a new environment and exploring what their lives as adults look like. The College Championship from the League of Legends side and the Riot side started in 2014. It was originally just some top colleges from around the country that we brought together for kind of a show match. It was in 2016 where we first started a Riot League that consisted of 32 schools. By 2017, we had over 200 schools participating, and then this year in 2019, we had 354 schools across North America competing in the championship. In the terms of format, there are 10 different conferences that sort of group schools together of varying skill levels. I mean, a lot of times you'll have colleges with teams that just come together straight out of solo queue. You have some like high plat, diamond, maybe a couple masters players in there. I'm referring to our sort of ranked ladder online. I myself am a gold level player. And then above gold, platinum, diamond, and then we have a series of master, grandmaster, and challenger. Challenger being the top 1% of players. And we even have colleges with teams that are built of 5 challenger players, similar to our professional LCS teams.
Right.
The teams will compete across those conferences throughout the year, across 5 months. And then by the time they make it to our college championship, we have a best of 3 quarterfinals and then best of 5 semifinals and finals to close it out.
Okay. I never do this. I never do like the raise your hand if question, but just so we know, who knows League of Legends and how much background do we need to get in on here? Okay. So real quick, just very briefly, describe the game in terms of how many players, in terms of what a MOBA is in general, and then we can kind of dig into how exactly you go about producing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So League of Legends is a multiplayer online battle arena game. That's what MOBA stands for. Essentially, it's 5-on-5, where players at the beginning of the game choose from a suite of 140 different characters with varying abilities. They group up together on the map and essentially fight across Summoner's Rift to take down the opposing team's base. And throughout the game, you can basically build up your golden experience, which is what makes you more powerful, by killing your opponents and taking objectives, towers, neutral monsters, and eventually sort of like scale up and take down your opponents.
Cool. Excellent. Everybody got that? Good. Cool. So let's talk about, let's start from the basics. What does your guys' facility in Santa Monica look like in terms of the control room? What are the operator positions? You guys have a full observer room in a MOBA game, as we'll get into. There's more observers. The observers have arguably a bigger role just in terms of volume of content and that type of thing, just because there's more going on. So just kind of overview of positions and what the production looks like, especially for something like last weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So we run the College Championship out of our LCS studios in Santa Monica, California. That's where Riot Games does a lot of our tournaments. So the regular season LCS, Academy games, and then recently we've started remote productions for a lot of our global events. So recently we finished the Mid-Season Invitational, which took place in Vietnam and Taiwan, all of which was produced and directed out of our studio in Los Angeles. So we do a lot of our production there, and it's great to be able to cover something like the College Championship in our home studio because very similar to E-League as well as traditional sports, we do have a full control room. When Ben showed his picture of the control room, I was like, is that our control room? It looks very similar. We've got our front row, again, consisting of director, TD, AD, myself, show producers. We have writers, Ventus screen operators running our LEDs, prompter operators, graphics control, stats. We've got the whole gamut, EVS operators, A1s, our whole audio department. Everything that you would expect out of a traditional sort of live broadcast environment, we've got in our home studio.
Right, but unlike Ben, whose observers are in the main room with them, you guys have a full observer room, which for a MOBA game is an absolute necessity. Talk about the workflow there, how many observers are there, what their varying roles are, how many players they're monitoring, that type of thing.
Yep, so similar to what Ben was saying about CSGO, having great observers is really paramount to our performance. We run 2 to 3 observers on a typical show, but we can have upwards of 6 depending on how much coverage we need, how we're swapping between games and matches. Our workflow is we run everything out of the control room up until we get into game, and at that point, because game is king, we rely on our observers to give us the footage that we need. They'll be making calls for replays. We have a main observer who's covering the live gameplay. Our observer 2 is spotting for them, sort of looking a couple seconds into the future to let them know like what kind of action is about to happen, so they're able to sort of like follow around on screen. And then we have a third observer who is typically reserved for pulling specific analyst desk replays for our post-game coverage, as well as some special moves we call the League Director tool, which essentially allows us to get alternate camera angles. In our reel, you saw sort of like the top-down view of the game, which is what we typically see from the observers, as well as like what you would see if you were at home playing the game. But we do have some like alternate camera angles to highlight those like really spectacular moments in the game.
And we'll talk a little bit about, you guys saw the different layouts on the screen, but how those decisions are made. There's different moments where different screen formats are going to work better, obviously. But let's take a step back and talk about pre-production first. For a game like this, where it's one of the most popular, let's just face it, activities on Earth, not just games. There's a lot to learn about these kids, right? I mean, you really have to dig in deep, and I think a lot of that Olympic-style storytelling has to come in. You got to explain why do we care about these kids? Why should we be rooting for these kids? So what does the pre-production process look like? How do you and your team kind of put those stories together in advance of the live broadcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So the College Championship is a little different than sort of our typical weekly broadcast. On an LCS show, we have the same team. We have franchise teams that have been around for years now, players that have been around since 2012. Like, these are stories that all of our players know and love, and it's really easy to sort of like follow those personalities. When it comes to the College Championship, you know, these are players that our viewers at home are not necessarily familiar with. So our challenge coming into these events is always like, how do we like amplify and tell the stories of these teams as quickly as possible as we approach the finals. For the College Championship specifically, a large part of the event isn't just putting on the broadcast show, but it's also giving these college players sort of the LCS experience, the pro experience. We're seeing now that at the peak of college League of Legends, these players are ready to go into the professional leagues. We've seen players graduate straight from a college championship onto an academy team, become LCS players. So we really want to create that aspirational path and show them what to expect when or if they pursue a pro career, which really helps us out in production, because that allows us to gather interviews from the players ahead of time. We also send out surveys to all of the attendees, sort of asking some general information like, how did you get into League? What is your team's play style? What were some big moments from you throughout the College Championship? So that we can pull on those to tell the stories of these teams and players throughout the week that we have them.
Right, and I was lucky to be there last week on Asset Day when you started pulling all those things together. So, I think that one thing that a lot of people in this room, when they do start doing esports, will have to confront is that just like any athlete, but especially in this sector, not everybody is the most interviewable, outgoing, right? So how do you kind of deal with, athletes, personalities, try to make them as outgoing, get what you want so you have a nice feature, a nice piece, get a background story on them. In terms of hand-holding, is there any advice you might have on that?
Yeah, so our philosophy is to, we never want to put words in players' mouths, so we don't do that. We'll just avoid that entirely. What we do is make sure that we give all the players the opportunity to go through media training ahead of time, let them know what to expect, and really that try to let them know that the viewers at home, they want to see you. They are a player just like you. Be yourself to the best that you can. And then from that point, like I said, we do have interviews with players, and then from there, we can sort of get a sense of how our player will be on camera. Additionally, in those surveys that we send out, we ask players who's comfortable being interviewed, as well as reaching out to the management staff. Who would you recommend being interviewed? Who have amazing stories to tell from your team? But then, at the end of the day, a player is going to be themselves on camera. Sometimes that results in some spectacular interviews. We actually had Niles, one of the guys that you saw in the reel, after his post-game interview, he was calling out his opposing top laner, saying that he was trash, looking forward to the next opportunity. It's all in good fun, and those are great moments for us on broadcast when the players really go hard in the paint with their banter.
Those Muhammad Ali moments, right? Yeah. And then you now have these assets, you have these stories, you have some background on these players. They've been there, getting the LCS experience, as you said. Now, how do you and your production team take that information and bring it into prepping for the actual broadcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll take that information into our larger story meeting. That'll involve our broadcast editors, our graphics team, our stats team, our on-air talent, and we'll sort of just go school by school, player by player, sort of give the introduction, bring everybody up to speed as best we can. We had the advantage this year of the college championship. We had 5 of 8 schools returning from previous championships. So that's always great that we can tell sort of the generational story of these schools as they return. And then we'll just try and focus on the stories that we think are going to be most relevant to the tournament at hand. Make sure that we're supporting that with graphics. Featured matchups are always something we try to lean towards. In the finals, for example, it came down to Niles and Gorica. These are 2 top laners that were smashing their competition throughout the tournament. So sort of focusing on those matchups as sort of key beats to examine throughout the day. And then obviously once we get into the live show, it's really about following the action that is happening and pivoting where we need to. Maybe we went into the day expecting top lane to be a really exciting matchup, but really it comes down to the mid laner who's been popping off and is 1v9ing, just carrying games.
Right. Okay, and we'll get into the live workflow in just a sec, but real quick, as I told Ben, we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty tech or anything, but just a quick overview. You guys have a hell of a facility at the LCS studio. What does the stage kind of look like? What does some of the LED look like? How many cameras in the control room? Maybe a couple key pieces of gear, just so everybody that lives and dies in their control room at home anyway, what does it look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like Ben, I also reached out to our engineers to make sure that I didn't get anything incorrect. So we actually have 2 sound stages. In the first stage, I don't actually have the square footage, but at capacity we have room for 450 fans. And then our setup is sort of in a U shape. You might have seen in the highlights. We also have an additional stage that is our analyst desk. Ben might actually. I think we took over the X-Play facility, so
right.
He might have the details. Additionally, so we have an Evertz routing system that runs sort of the backbone of our studio and our multi-view, Genlock, and time codes. It's a 576 or 576 squared router for our studio feeds, and then we have another 256 squared router for a transmission. Grass Valley runs our switcher and our cameras. We have 18 camera feeds coming in. 10 of those are the player face cams, and then another 8 cameras spread throughout our studio and our analyst desk space. We've got a Cayenne switcher in our A control. We have a smaller control room that has a Carrera switcher. We have EVS playback. Instead of XT3s like E-League, we have XT4s because we're transmitting 1080p footage, which is a lot of data. Most productions don't run that, but we want to run 1080p 5994 footage so that the game that you're seeing on screen is as similar to the game that you will see if you were playing at home. That's something that's really important to us. We want our players, when they're watching the game, as Ben said, it's the same at Riot. Like, game is king, and we want to make sure that when you are watching League of Legends, it feels as similar to playing it at home as possible. We use Studer audio consoles. We use Row LEDs for our studio. That's Ventus software operating those systems. We use Viz for all of our graphics. I think we have 3 Viz engines on our shows. And then for our AR, which we don't use for the College Championship, but do use on our regular LCS broadcast, we've got some Stipe control. And then for transmission, we use an RTMP feed straight into YouTube and Twitch to send our feeds out into the world.
All right, text out of the way. Awesome. It is worth noting, though, the 1080p 60 factor in esports. As schools start to get into this, it's kind of a must. I mean, in terms of really, really high speed, heavy hertz, as well as high resolution, it's more important in the esports experience than in the traditional experience, and it's kind of not worth doing it if you're not going to do it that way. So it's something that everybody should take into account. I know a lot of you don't have 1080p capable facilities, but at least keep in the back of your mind that there will be people complaining if you don't deliver the best possible feed, right?
Yeah, well, I would say, so at least my perspective, 1080p is that is the cream of the crop. That is like super aspirational. It's very expensive. I think you can get away with 1080 60. Or 1080i, sorry. I would say the 60 frames is something that is probably more important. Even then, like, our players now are moving up to 144 hertz displays, and we'll have like segments where we bring the pros onto our analyst desk set, and we have some computers there to use. And they're not the same as their gaming PCs that they have on stage, and they lock off at 60 hertz, and they're like, oh my God, this is unplayable. I'm like,
right.
What are you talking about? This is really great gaming equipment, but it's not like what they're playing with on stage. So I think if you want to get the like most accurate gaming experience, being able to replicate what players are seeing on screen is something to strive for.
Especially in a MOBA game too. I mean, if that millisecond really makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. If you have smooth, fluid motion, it's much easier to pull off some of the like high mechanic plays.
Right. Okay, so let's get into the live workflow a little bit. So, for example, last weekend, show starts, things are going. Take us a little bit of a day in the life, and what were some of the key moments, the momentum swings? How did that impact you guys in the production room? How did you maybe react on the fly to some of the storylines that you didn't expect, that type of thing?
Yeah, so much like Ben and E-League, you sort of like go into the day with sort of like the best laid plan, sort of what you expect to happen. And then once you get into the live production, game is king, and you follow along with the action. So our day starts with again, call times about 4 hours before show starts. At that point, we're running through ESU, making sure all of our systems are working properly. We'll do a read-through with our writers and our talent to make sure that everybody is caught up and has the language that they're looking for getting into segments. We'll then do a full show rehearsal where we'll just like make sure that everything is running smoothly. All of our graphics are running properly. EVS has all their B-roll good to go. Any highlight packages that we're looking to run, making sure that our graphics and stats team, as well as observers, have connections to the server where the games are being played, that we're ingesting data from the game to feed directly into our stats and graphics systems. and then we've got a quick lunch, and then we go live. We get into it. We have a transition period between games of about 12 minutes if we're in a best of series, which gives teams time to go and huddle, talk about their strategy for the next game. And then we fill that content with either sponsor obligations as well as our analyst desk post-game coverage, where they're reviewing the big beats of the game, talking about the draft. That's something that's really important in League of Legends, is sort of like the character select before the game starts that determines the comp that you're going to play with, kind of the play style that you're going to need to execute and win the game. And then we'll get back into it. At the end of a series, we've got a little bit longer transition, probably closer to 17 or 20 minutes, where again, we're filling that time with covering the wider story of the team as they progress through the tournament, some post-game breakdown, and then setting up our next match. In terms of like reacting on the fly, I think everybody loves an underdog story, so those are super easy to tell. We had the opportunity on this college championship. University of Western Ontario, you heard them talk about it in the reel. They don't have school support. They are like a fully student-run organization. And for them to come out and knock out Irvine, which is like a powerhouse of college.
And most well-funded, right? I mean, the opposite of what you just said in terms of school participation, right?
Exactly. Like ESPN is doing a documentary on UCI and their esports program that you can check out. So to see a school like that knock out such a heavyweight in the tournament, those are super easy stories to tell. We just kind of sit back, react, and kind of live it with the players as best we can.
Cool. So you're at the front bench, and tell me about your interaction with observers. I had asked Ben, and I know that it is very different from format to format, but kind of take us through how much is a listen, how much is a tell, what are the comms like back and forth, and then how does that kind of play out on the live stream?
Yep, absolutely. So once we get into game, our hands of the broadcast are really rest with the observers. We go through great lengths to make sure that we're hiring the best observers that we can. They're making all of the games in calls. They essentially are functioning as our director in game. They'll be choosing what players to follow, what kind of action is most important. When a replay comes up, they'll wait for a break in the game. One thing in League of Legends is after some action happens, you can return to your home base, and that's where you need to go to purchase items, which will make you a stronger character in the game. During those times, those usually take about a minute to reset back to the base and then come out to like have action and exciting gameplay. So those are opportunities where they'll say like, hey, we've got a replay ready. They'll count it in. Our TD will swap over to whichever observer the replay is coming from, and then we'll go back to observer one for sort of our live gameplay. But they control all of the in-game action that's going on. We pretty much let them drive. Most of the time, it'll be small optimizations. Casters will also like seamlessly mention in their coverage, oh, like it'd be really exciting to see like what's going on in the bot lane. Observers are listening into the cast, so they'll like go over to a different part of the map to kind of highlight what the casters are looking for.
And that was my next question, is same thing, relationship with the casters. So how much, you just gave one good example, but how much do the casters drive versus casters take feedback from you guys? Again, that's something that, as I've looked at so many different live shows, it really varies depending on the caster's personality, depending on your guys' workflow in-house. So how do you guys handle that caster relationship?
Yeah, so for our broadcast, so much of our team are League fans and League experts, at least from a storytelling perspective. So our story meetings will involve a lot of our on-air talent, as well as the rest of our production crew, sort of like chiming in on what the stories are to follow. My experience has been a lot of our casters and analysts, because they're just so smart when it comes to the game, will tunnel in on things like the draft, like champion picks, things like that. And it's really helpful for us to add our perspective of like, hey, let's take the wider view of like this player who's just performing really well, or this superstar who's been underperforming. And those are the stories that are easy for our bronze, silver, and gold players to follow along with, because we're just going to get lost in the minutia. But those are great learning opportunities as well, so you don't want to stifle that. But that is sort of like our perspective to storytelling and working with those individuals. And then once we get into show, it's a lot of our talent sort of driving the story of what's going on. And our front row and production crew is basically making sure that our show runs as smoothly as possible. So I'm getting in the ear of talent, letting them know how much time they have left, where we're going next. A lot of it is also prompter driven, so while the game is going on, I'm usually talking with our analyst desk about the stories that they're going to be telling in our post-game coverage, making sure that they have the elements that they need to support their stories, whether those are graphical lower thirds with stats, full screens, or even specialty B-roll that's like highlighting a particular player. Jungle pathing is something that comes to mind as like a minutia in the game that they can highlight specifically, which you wouldn't normally catch in the live observed game.
Cool. Let's talk about the screen layout and how you guys make decisions there. When I first started watching League of Legends, I was fascinated by you have the overhead option, you have the option to take the audio, as we saw during the clip, of a team as you know, a big moment is playing out. You can just kind of sit and have a one-on-one setup. So, you know, what is the thinking? What are some moments do you have go-to, like a templatized thing where you say, well, if they're about to take the map here, then we're going to go to this layout, or, you know, that type of thing?
Yeah, so League of Legends is unique in an esport in that it's, in my opinion, it's very viewer-friendly. Essentially, that top-down view that you'll see in a League of Legends broadcast is exactly the same top-down view you have when you're actually playing the game. The difference is, if I'm a player at home, I have indicators on my screen basically telling me where my abilities will be headed if I choose to use them, and cooldowns of my abilities. But otherwise, you have that same top-down view. So that's sort of our go-to that we watch 98% of the game.
It's your 50-yard line camera, right? Pretty much. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's where we live. When it comes to some sort of like macro strategy things, like we'll have, like for example, if a team is pushing multiple turrets on a base, we'll need to zoom out a little bit to see all of that action and fit it on screen. Otherwise, like I said, the replays are still that top-down feed. We usually drop away a lot of the HUD so that you can see the action going on. We'll slow it down so that our color casters can kind of like break down the action that you're seeing on screen. We like to do reaction shots as often as we get them. Again, as long as it's not impacting live gameplay. Our observers also have the ability to like dump us out of any kind of replay or react that they're going. They'll say back to live, and we'll immediately go to observer one to see the live gameplay as it's happening.
Cool. We're gonna ask if anybody has some questions out there. Raise your hand. We'll grab you a mic. But same question I ask everybody, because everybody handles it differently. The Twitch chat function. How much do you guys take the feedback? How much do you swallow it and regurgitate out? How much do you ignore it? You know, how much is that incorporated? Because it's, again, especially in League of Legends, it is a very dynamic aspect that you aren't going to find in other live viewing experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the live chat is something that is really unique and special to live streaming in general. I think it's sort of like a must-have feature for any sort of like streaming broadcast. It can be very toxic, but you also have some like great engagement and live reactions. For us, most of the feedback that we take from Twitch during show is related to technical issues. We want to make sure that they're having like a great viewing experience. But like if we have a segment and we kind of want to get like that live gauge on like how it's playing, like oh, is this going to be funny? Like, are people going to like this?
Yeah.
We'll monitor the chat for like the wall of like Omega lulz or the wall of cringe, and that's like a good sort of like temperature check in the moment. But we don't overanalyze Twitch chat. I think you get into sort of a dangerous area if you go too deep into that rabbit hole.
It's a definite rabbit hole. That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I think we get a question over here.
Yeah. Peter Power far as Winthrop University, we're actually starting our esports team in the fall, and League of Legends is one of our games we're going to have. So as someone that's more of like a FIFA 2K player, what are some ways to learn the game, actually learn the game, so when we go into our first broadcast, are there any resources you might have in particular, or just suggestions on how to learn what's actually kind of happening on screen, what to expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll put a plug out there. League of Legends is a free-to-play game. You can download it at home. I think that's the best way to learn. It's probably not the fastest way to learn, but there is tons of third-party content out there, from streams to educational YouTube videos. All of our VODs from all of our LCS broadcasts, both the College Championship, Academy, LCS, our international tournaments are all available on YouTube for free as well. And those are great resources to see, not only learn the game and see how it's played, but like get a perspective of what a broadcast could look like for those games.
I would say, as somebody that knew just dog shit about this 2 years ago, I really kind of threw myself in, and exactly what he just said. There's so much VOD content on YouTube. Just have it on the background when you're doing work and stuff. Just kind of listening to a lot of the key terms, a lot of just the flow of how broadcasts are will kind of help you understand the game itself a little bit more. I would agree that playing the game first probably is not necessarily the best filter to get you in there.
It's really fun, though.
It's fun once you get
addicting.
Going. Yeah. I think we got a question over there.
How are you? I'm interested in the editing aspects. You're producing so much content, both in live and then in post. Do you use traditional editing? Are you using any strategies in the cloud? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so interestingly, at least for our live broadcasts, I think our editing workflows are a little bit different. On a lot of traditional sports, your EVS operator will be cutting highlight packages for you. We actually have a separate live edit team where we are ingesting feeds through EVS, and they're getting streamed directly to our basically our media storage library. And then from there, we have editors working in Final Cut to make our highlight packages for our live games that are then being exported back to the EVS. It allows us to create a more custom experience, a little bit more premium experience over quick EVS packages. And then outside of that, like I said, we do have basically a network drive where all of our footage is being sent, both from live broadcasts as well as our features team, which are shooting player interviews in post-game. They're shooting stage B-roll. Depending on the piece that they're working at, they'll go on location with our pros and teams, dress them up in cool outfits, and do the whole setup to make some really premium pieces. But we do have multiple teams working on it. It's definitely like it takes a village. We have our live broadcast editors who are doing a lot of the editing for our actual broadcast, cutting B-roll, highlight packages, things like that. Our features team focusing on more premium content that you would find on YouTube. These are setting up the stories for the week to come. No, nothing on the cloud. We have internal network drives where we store most of our stuff. We do have archive stuff. Again, not in the cloud, but offsite, where we're pulling sort of like if we need footage from, our World Championship in 2014. That's where that stuff is stored.
Yeah, their post-production operation is pretty robust, as is all of the big players in esports with Blizzard and all these other guys. You guys just have really amazing stuff. We haven't had that much time to talk about it, but if you can pick his brain, there's plenty much going on. Right in front here?
So I'm going to apologize. This is a two-part techie question. So
I'll do my best.
I was going to say, we'll see.
So I think you mentioned that you you started to do remote production, and I'm curious to know how you got the raw feeds. I think the event was in Asia, and your production facilities in California. How do you manage the quality and latency, making the producer feel that he's there making the calls, so that the viewer, especially for live, feels like it's happening all in one physical place? And the second part is, once you've produced it, are you only sending it to Twitch? Are there other platforms that you're thinking of sending it simultaneously to get the most amount of viewers, or does that come into play at all?
Yeah, for sure. So For the first one, I'm actually going to plug you guys who I think
I was going to say, yeah, I might be able to help more, but you go first, yeah.
Essentially, my understanding is for our remote productions, we use a product called High Vision, and basically we have, hold on, I do have notes on some of our remote feeds.
As you're pulling that out, nobody is pushing the at-home production space more than Riot. I mean, I'm going to get in trouble for that. Damn it! But I mean, seriously, a lot of the feeds from Ho Chi Minh City, which, guys, there's not a lot of connectivity in Vietnam, let's be honest, came back over public internet. I think it was like 26 streams or something like that. You'll see a story next week on sportsvideo.org about it, so you can just read it. For the mid-season invitational, for their World Championships last year, everything is done at home, and it's done over very low bandwidth with very low latency. And they've been really interesting in the ways they've been able to accomplish that.
Yeah, so basically, from the notes that I have from our engineers, for MSI most recently, we had 3 1 gigabit lines that were sending footage back and forth. And we use a product called High Vision, which essentially encodes the footage into an H.264 format. So each video stream is taking up roughly 15 megabits. Down from our previous remote setup, which was using ATP J2K streams that were 200 megabits. So that's what allows us to use a much smaller pipe with the 3 1 gigabit lines. And then your second question, sorry?
Where else does it go? Other distribution outlets?
Yeah. So our content goes primarily to Twitch and YouTube. We go where our players are. I think now more than ever, people want to watch what they want, when they want. And sending it out to stream allows us to do that. It also gives us the freedom of not being burdened by sort of like time boxes, which is super helpful. And then depending on the region, we will see places like China or Brazil, they will broadcast their streams out to cable. Really, it's whatever makes sense for where we're trying to broadcast. And at least in North America, that's to Twitch and YouTube.
Cool. We're going to sneak one more in over here.
Yeah, my question is not really about the video side of it, but as it goes forward and then NCAA and it launches, are you worried all about sponsorship and streamers as they stream on their own where they can't profit off being a gamer? Because you get the UCF kicker from a couple years ago that had to shut down his YouTube page because he was promoting that as a football player. Do you think that would have any effect on the college streams if it becomes NCAA regulated?
I don't think so. At least from my perspective, so much of League and esports in general is about the community and the ecosystem, and it's not all just driven by Riot and our broadcast. We encourage people to stream their own games at home, and then in terms of sponsorships, we're seeing tons of investment in this scene, both at the college level and at the LCS level. This is an area where I think sponsors are seeing. Like I said, this is where sort of their core demographic is turning towards. Are these esports of games that they've grown up playing? I, as a professional, don't have as much time to play video games anymore, but that means that I can have a stream up at work in the background and still follow the stories of the game and the elite players participating in them.
Excellent. We're going to top it off with the kicker question that I warned you about that I gave Ben. So, again, League of Legends is probably one of, if not the first, esport that a lot of schools are going to end up adopting as they open their own teams. So, if somebody from a school next week is producing their first any kind of MOBA match, but especially League of Legends, what's the one piece of advice that you have for them?
So the first thing I would say is don't be intimidated by the setup that we have at Riot Games. Technology is in a great space where you can get a couple of really good computer rigs and you can do a broadcast using free software online. OBS is a great tool. It's basically a software switcher that you can run off of your PC. You set up a green screen, a single camera. You can put your casters wherever you need at that point, and then you can run a like really solid production with much less resources than we use in our broadcast. The other things would be just like Ben, like the game is king. As much stability as you can provide to making sure the game runs smoothly and getting into game as quickly as possible. I told you about our transition times, 12 minutes between series, 17 minutes between different teams. Those are optimized to be as low as possible because we know that our fans at the end of the day want to see the gameplay. And then the last thing I would say is just like traditional sports, what makes these exciting are the personalities around the game. So as much as you can invest in discovering who these players and these participants are and giving that information to your audience, that's what's going to keep people coming back.
He cheated too, that's 3. But Eamon came across the country from LA after his biggest event of the year to come speak here. So a really big hand, we really appreciate you. Yeah, so far. Thanks, man.